bring in Dr. Georgios Samaras, who's Assistant Professor of Public Policy at King's College here in London. Good to have you with us, Dr. Samaras. Thank you for joining us. So, Swiss voters rejected the population cap vote, but the result was still quite close, wasn't it? What does that tell us, do you think, about how divided the Swiss electorate is on this issue?
I think that there's this impression that Switzerland has a direct democracy system that allows people through referenda to make meaningful decisions about policy making in the country. In my view, it's such a flawed idea. The division that you accurately pointed out is serious. There is nearly 45% of the population that believes that through biopolitical measures they will be able to control the population. This is all against migration, and the referendum was proposed by the far right, which also indicates that some of these ideas have entered the mainstream in the most aggressive way possible, and it shows also that countries will inevitably rely on those measures to curb the migration waves in Europe. So, yeah, we're witnessing some really, really groundbreaking measures within European states.
And just let's talk a little bit about this idea of direct democracy and this interesting system that there is in Switzerland, where major national issues can be put to the whole nation to vote on in referenda. Something that's not that common. Of course, we had something similar 10 years ago in Britain, which led to very serious consequences. But leaving that aside, for Switzerland, does this system of so-called direct democracy, does it lead to effective government, or can it lead to chaos? And how binding are these votes? If it had passed, for example, would Switzerland really have been forced to leave the EU's free movement of people system, for example?
They're not legally binding, and the state doesn't have to implement them, but their ideas and also some of those concepts that are being proposed are absolutely absurd. In the middle of the pandemic, they managed to ban face covers like niqab from public. This was aimed at targeted tiny percentage of the population in Switzerland that happens to identify as Muslim. With this latest referendum, despite not being legally binding, it demonstrates how powerful the far right has become. I mentioned earlier Michel Foucault, which is the biopolitical nature. The state tries to legislate over bodies and identities to curb migration. Financially, that would be a disastrous decision, primarily because what you also pointed out about the measures that will be required to be introduced before the 10 million, basically if it passed the 10 million mark, because they will have to leave free movement. What would that look like? What is Switzerland prepared to do to deal with the economic destruction that will follow without any kind of migration coming to the country? That's what I mean about direct democracy. It's flawed because it tries to give some power to the people, but the power ends up being over cultural issues that have been turned into dominant themes in politics, and they should not be dominant themes.
Indeed. And just very briefly, of course, the Swiss government saying that foreign workers are needed, but the foreign-born population has risen rapidly, hasn't it, in Switzerland? And this backlash against foreign migration, at least in the far right, is that anything particularly new, though, and does it reflect what we're really seeing across Europe, this rising tide of nationalism?
The difference here is how a measure that is so aggressive and so, I would argue, Hitlerian became nearly a policy-making tool in the hands of a political entity that is trying to demonize the migration in Switzerland. Other parts of the far right in Europe don't have that kind of power, but because of the Swiss system, a referenda can be proposed by political parties across the spectrum. The fact that this referendum took place shows us what could happen if the far right comes to power. And that applies to most German-speaking countries like Austria, Germany. Switzerland, I think, is trying to somehow deal with the questions that the far right poses, like, do we want this, or do we basically reject it? In this case, they rejected it, but the majority, of course, was tiny. And it also shows that the far right has the power to proceed with having a say in the policy-making agenda, even if that is financially disastrous.
Dr. Georgios Samaras, Assistant Professor of Public Policy at King's College London, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us.